Welcome to a place where family loyalty shatters, silence finally screams, and betrayal comes from the people you trusted most. These are not fairy tales. These are the moments when greed turns blood into enemies, when love collapses under the weight of inheritance, and when marriages become weapons instead of safe havens. Here, you'll hear stories where silence was used to control until one act of violence changed everything. Where husbands didn't just betray vows, but secretly aligned with those willing to destroy everything for power and money. And where revenge doesn't arrive through mercy, but through truth, evidence, and the law. Every story exposes raw emotions, hidden deals, and shocking secrets that were never meant to surface. If you believe that justice doesn't always look gentle and that truth can be the most dangerous form of revenge, then you're exactly where you belong. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Holiday dinners were polished, smiles practiced, laughter timed just right. This family thrived on appearances, on the illusion of unity and tradition. Money was never discussed openly, yet it hovered in every room like a silent judge. The inheritance was treated as destiny, not responsibility, and love only existed as long as no one questioned who would control it. That illusion shattered the moment documents were mentioned. Voices hardened, eyes shifted, conversations stopped being about family and started sounding like negotiations. Blood ties meant nothing when numbers entered the room. What hurt most wasn't the greed, it was how easily affection disappeared, how quickly loyalty evaporated. The betrayal cut deeper at home. A husband who once promised protection suddenly became distant, secretive, careful with words. Late-night phone calls stopped when footsteps approached. Messages were deleted. Excuses replaced honesty. Trust unraveled slowly, painfully, until the truth finally surfaced. Private meetings with family members, legal advice taken behind closed doors, and plans built without consent. Marriage had become a convenience, not a bond. What shocked the most was discovering how willingly he aligned himself with the very people willing to destroy what remained of dignity. The inheritance mattered more than the vows, more than safety, more than life itself. Every whispered agreement felt like a knife, every fake smile another reminder that greed had already won their hearts. When violence finally entered the picture, it wasn't rage-driven, it was calculated, the kind that believes money can erase consequences. Lying in pain brought clarity no conversation ever could. This wasn't just a family dispute, it was an attempt to erase a problem standing in the way of wealth. But greed has a flaw. It leaves traces. Hospital records don't lie, surveillance doesn't forget, and fear makes people careless. The same husband who conspired in silence panicked when authorities arrived. Stories changed, statements contradicted. The truth spilled faster than anyone could stop it. Now the family image is in ruins, exposed for what it truly was, an empire built on betrayal. The inheritance they fought so viciously over is frozen, poisoned by their own actions, and the people who believed money made them untouchable are finally learning the cost. Greed didn't just turn blood into enemies, it destroyed everything they thought they owned. Silence had always been expected. Questions were inconvenient. Feelings were dismissed as overreactions. Over the years, quiet became survival, a way to keep peace in a house where control wore the disguise of concern. Every decision was guided, every opinion subtly corrected, until even thoughts felt monitored. The less that was said, the safer everything seemed, or so it appeared. That silence was carefully reinforced at home. A husband encouraged it with calm words and reassuring touches, always suggesting patience, always advising restraint. Disagreements were framed as misunderstandings. Apologies were demanded even when nothing wrong had been done. Slowly, confidence eroded. Trust shifted from instinct to obedience. What wasn't realized at the time was how closely those private lessons mirrored the family's unspoken rules. Behind closed doors, manipulation grew sharper. Conversations were repeated selectively to others. Small mistakes were exaggerated. Emotional reactions were documented and quietly stored away like future evidence. Late nights became routine. Phone calls were taken outside. Questions were met with irritation instead of answers. Silence wasn't just expected anymore, it was required. Then came the moment that broke everything. The act itself was swift, deliberate, and meant to send a message. Pain was immediate, but clarity followed just as fast. That single act of violence exposed what years of emotional control had been hiding. This wasn't protection, it was preparation. The silence had never been for peace, it was to make sure no one would speak when it mattered most. At the hospital, the lies began unraveling. Stories didn't match. Timelines shifted. A husband's concern looked rehearsed, too polished for someone truly afraid. Records revealed consultations with attorneys long before the incident. Messages recovered from a cloud account exposed plans discussed in confidence, strategies designed to discredit, to isolate, to control assets by controlling perception. The most devastating truth wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how long it had been planned. The marriage hadn't been a partnership, it had been a position. Loyalty had a price, and silence was the currency. Once words finally replaced fear, everything collapsed quickly. Authorities listened. Evidence spoke louder than years of obedience ever had. The people who relied on quiet compliance panicked when questions were answered honestly. The husband who once demanded calm now begged for discretion. Silence had been their strongest weapon, but once it shattered, there was nothing left to protect them. And they will never control the story again. Marriage was supposed to be the safest place. Promises were spoken softly, rings exchanged with confidence, futures planned as if loyalty were guaranteed. Trust felt natural, effortless, unquestioned. That belief made the betrayal far more devastating when the truth finally surfaced, not from an outsider, but from the one person sworn to protect above all else. The first signs were subtle. Conversations ended abruptly when entering a room. Shared finances became complicated without explanation. Legal language slipped into casual talk, words like contingency and authority spoken too easily. At night, distance replaced comfort. The bed felt larger, colder, filled with unspoken calculations instead of connection. The alliance revealed itself, accidentally. An email notification flashed across the screen that wasn't meant to be seen. Names appeared together that should never have been connected. Meetings were scheduled in secret. Documents were forwarded and deleted. The same family members who smiled at dinner were strategizing with the man trusted most, mapping out futures that didn't include safety or consent. What hurt wasn't just infidelity of loyalty, it was intentional replacement. Plans showed discussions about control, about minimizing influence, about presenting a narrative that painted instability where there was none. The marriage had been reframed behind closed doors as a liability. Devotion was recast as weakness. Years of trust were reduced to leverage. Phone records confirmed it. Long calls late at night, messages filled with reassurance, not to a spouse, but to conspirators. Promises were made freely to them, while honesty at home became scarce. The alliance wasn't accidental or emotional, it was strategic, and it was ruthless. When violence entered the story, everything finally made sense. It wasn't an explosion of anger, it was the execution of a plan already agreed upon. A moment designed to discredit, to silence, to justify the transfer of power and property. Standing beside the hospital bed, concern looked rehearsed, almost performative. Questions were answered too quickly, blame was suggested before facts were known. But secrets leave trails. Digital backups don't disappear. Witnesses remember details, and fear makes liars careless. As evidence accumulated, the alliance began to fracture. Statements conflicted, messages resurfaced. The truth became undeniable. The realization settled slowly and painfully. Betrayal didn't arrive through strangers. It lived inside the vows, shared meals, and whispered goodnights. And once that truth was exposed, nothing could save the marriage or the men who destroyed it. Forgiveness was expected. It was suggested gently at first, then demanded outright, as if mercy could erase bruises, lies, and months of planning. There were speeches about family unity, about moving forward quietly, about protecting a respected name. But forgiveness would have required pretending nothing happened, and pretending was what allowed everything to go this far. Truth, on the other hand, asked for nothing but courage. It started with small, undeniable facts, medical reports that clearly stated the nature of the injuries, security footage that showed timing no excuse could explain, phone records that mapped out conversations long before anyone admitted there was a conflict. Each piece felt heavy, not because it was painful to reveal, but because it confirmed what had been denied for so long. The most difficult evidence involved the husband. Financial transfers appeared that had no innocent explanation. Emails revealed coordination, not concern. Messages exposed agreements made in advance, outlining what should be said, who should speak first, and how responsibility would be redirected. Reading them felt like discovering a stranger living behind a familiar face. Every "don't worry" from the past echoed with new meaning. Law enforcement listened carefully. Unlike family, they didn't interrupt. Unlike a spouse, they didn't minimize. Facts were facts, and patterns were impossible to ignore. Statements were taken. Warrants followed. The confidence that once filled expensive rooms evaporated as questions became sharper and answers less convincing. The powerful family name, once treated as armor, became a liability. Neighbors talked, colleagues distanced themselves, business partners asked uncomfortable questions. The image so carefully maintained for decades cracked under the weight of public record. Court filings don't care about reputation. Truth doesn't negotiate. The husband tried last-minute explanations. Apologies arrived too late, tangled in excuses and fear. Promises were made again, but now they sounded hollow, stripped of authority. The alliance that once felt unbreakable collapsed the moment self-preservation took priority. Watching it all unfold brought no joy, only certainty. This wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was accountability delivered without softness. No yelling, no threats, just evidence placed exactly where it belonged. In the end, mercy would have protected them, but truth made sure they could never hide again. If this story shook you, if it felt real, or if it reminded you that betrayal often hides behind familiar faces, don't stay silent. Tap like so this truth reaches more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories where greed is exposed, silence is broken, and justice finally arrives. And before you go, leave a comment because your voice matters here. Until the next truth is revealed, remember this: some families protect you, and some reveal who they really are when everything is on the line.